It's recording. Okay, salvete mihi nomen est Stella et hoc est Backer the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast, episode 194 for July MMXX. And this is The Last of Us Part 2 discussion special. Explicit! Batgirl the Oracle is brought to you by the TBU, the Batman universe, of course, and the YouTube channel With Eyes East, which we'll talk about probably at the end or so. Batgirl the Oracle is brought to you by MileHighComics.com, your new and collectible comic book store. Mile High Comics has an inventory of over 5 million comics from the gold, silver, bronze, and modern age, and over 100,000 trade paperbacks. If you're not into the vintage stock, Mile High Comics also has a subscription service called the New Issue Comics Express, offering a discounted price for comics ready to hit the shelves. So if you're looking for vintage back issues or a great modern subscription service, be sure to check out MileHighComics.com. Well, this episode has been months in the making, actually, and we can talk about that. That's kind of fun to think about, but I am so happy to bring on the guest that I have for this one. Donovan and I call him our mutual boyfriend. I call him Harold the man, but you can call him Harrison or Harry Chute. Welcome to the show for the first time.
Thank you. I am very honored to be here, Stella. This is amazing.
We have been talking about The Last of Us Part 2 for a while, probably since they, I guess, put out their first release date. And then as it started getting closer, we were seeing all this stuff spiraling out of control, which we'll get into. And then I finally got up the nerve to ask if you wanted to be on this podcast special, and you said yes, and then I got super pumped for it. So I'm so happy that you're on. I'm really looking forward to finally discussing this.
I know, it's almost like the lead up to this podcast mirrors the development cycle of the game.
That's true, except we didn't have any controversy between ourselves or any leaks or anything like that. But yeah, we have been playing alongside each other. I finished before you, and it's been fun to send screenshots back and forth on PlayStation. But you just have to be careful. Like after I finished it, I stopped talking to you, which I felt a bit bad about, just because I didn't want to spoil anything, because it's hard to ask, like, where are you? And, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's all led up to this momentous event of talking about this particular game. Now, I did say that this special does have an explicit tag, which my podcast normally doesn't, but there are just a couple quotes from the game that I want to say verbatim, and they have the swears, and I think I'll probably be pulling audio where appropriate. And so I re-listened to my The Last of Us Part 1, I guess we can say, episode, and I was listening to the trailer, and I'm like, wow, I bleeped out all those swears in that trailer, which I think, is fine, but I thought I'm just going to have it just be what it's going to be. So just to be aware of that, I'm not going to be throwing a lot of stuff out at you, but it's going to be more than normal, which is none at all. So also, you could potentially play a drinking game with how many times that either I or Harry say, I'm so confused, this was really weird, what's going on, why did this happen, that kind of stuff, especially with like the context of the game. And trigger warning that we may also talk about white male entitlement that might pop up. Yeah, so just in case that might make you offensive. Though I was thinking though that anyone who might have that probably wouldn't be listening to this show.
Yeah, I imagine so.
So I think we're safe to talk about that. And then, of course, if you have been watching this show, if this is the third episode, you've noticed that all my hair is gone because I pulled it out playing this game.
Very stressful experience.
No, I was ready for a big change and cut it all off. And so you guys are seeing it here first. So, oh man, I guess we should just get started, huh? Is there any other preamble we need to get into to talk about this?
Just to reiterate my excitement, I'm so glad we're finally at this moment.
I know, yes. Oh, and I should say that I have told Harry that I fully expect like a 3-hour podcast, because I'm frightened about Zoom. We will pause at certain points. So I think it'll be a 3-part episode on YouTube. Part 1 is real world context, what was going on at Naughty Dog leading up to, as well as surrounding it and up to release. Part 2 will be gameplay, just how it felt playing it, and themes and things like that. And then part 3 will be really a deep dive into the characters and probably specific moments. And then the ending will also be in that, which will be, I think, a big chunk of the discussion there. So just so you are aware, in case there's something that you would rather watch, you can look for one of those 3 parts. Okay, well, I do want to give you at least a brief synopsis of this particular game, which I got from Wikipedia. So thank you, Wikipedia. But in case you haven't played, you can at least get a sense of what was going on. Most of civilization has been destroyed by a mutant cordyceps fungus, which transforms its human host into an aggressive creature or creatures known as the infected. 5 years ago, Joel Miller escorted the teenager Ellie, who is immune, to a hospital run by the Fireflies, a rebel militia, in hopes of developing a cure. Learning the Fireflies would kill Ellie to create a vaccine, Joel killed them and escaped with an unconscious Ellie, later lying that a cure was impossible. Now living in a settlement in Jackson, Wyoming, Joel confesses his guilt to his brother Tommy. It's interesting they use the word guilt. I think I
Yeah.
would disagree with that, actually, from Wikipedia, but okay. Abby leads members of the Washington Liberation Front. They are known as the WLF, or Wolf, so I'll probably call them Wolf. That's probably easier from now on. Militia to the outskirts of Jackson, seeking vengeance against Joel for murdering her father, a Firefly surgeon, the one that was going to operate on Ellie. After Abby is rescued from infected by Joel and Tommy, she takes him back to the Wolf group. Meanwhile, Ellie and her girlfriend, well, I mean, they just had one kiss, but okay. Dina leave Jackson in search of the brothers because they were caught up in a snowstorm. Ellie enters the Wolf camp to witness Abby beat Joel to death and swears revenge. Tommy heads to the Wolf. So then there's a chunk. We mourn Joel. Ellie wants to go off right away. Tommy says, no, it's not a good idea. Maria also says no, but Tommy sneaks out, and then Ellie also sneaks out. So there's some things missing here. But Tommy heads to the Wolf base in Seattle, and Ellie and Dina secretly follow him. After escaping a wolf ambush, the pair retreat to a theater where Ellie reveals her immunity to Dina, even though she said it before, and learns that Dina is pregnant. The next day, with Dina sick, Ellie pursues Tommy alone and encounters Dina's ex-boyfriend Jesse, who has followed them to Seattle. Evading the Seraphites, also known as the Scars, a cult fighting the wolf for control of Seattle, Ellie tracks another wolf member, Nora, to a hospital and tortures her for information. Realizing Nora is a former Firefly, and specifically at the Salt Lake City encampment, Ellie recalls how 2 years ago she returned to the Firefly hospital and learned the truth from Joel. Or, well, she learned the truth, and then she also got Joel to say, yes, that is the truth. The next day, Jesse leaves to pursue Tommy, and Ellie heads to Abby's hideout at an aquarium. After a struggle, Ellie kills Abby's allies, Mel, who is pregnant, she didn't know it at the time, and Owen, or I should be specific that Ellie did not know at the time that Mel was pregnant, though that doesn't necessarily forgive anything that Ellie did, and Owen as well. All these are just names that we don't care about, but soon you will. Returning to the theater, Ellie, Dina, Jesse, and Tommy are ambushed by Abby, who kills Jesse and holds Tommy hostage. 3 days earlier, yikes, in a reversal of characters, you're now Abby. Abby learns that Owen has gone missing while investigating the Seraphites. The wolf leader, Isaac, believes he may have defected and plans to assault the Seraphites' island settlement. Searching for Owen, Abby is captured and witnesses the Seraphites shatter the arm of a runaway Seraphite, Yara. After being rescued by Yara's younger brother, Lev, they arrive at the aquarium where Abby finds Owen. He plans to sail to Santa Barbara, where the Fireflies were supposedly regrouping. Yara's arm requires amputation. We're skipping some things there, but it's okay. So Abby and Lev retrieve medical supplies from the hospital, which is overrun by infected. Oh boy, yes, this sure is. Lev runs away to the Seraphite settlement to convince her mother to leave the cult. Abby and Yara pursue him, fending off an attack from Tommy. At the settlement, they discover Lev has killed his devout mother in self-defense. As the wolf attack the settlement, Yara kills Isaac and sacrifices herself to let Abby and Lev escape. Abby and Lev return to the aquarium to find Owen and Mel killed by Ellie and a map leading to Ellie's theater hideout. In the present, so now everything has come back together. Abby shoots Tommy and overpowers Ellie and Dina. Learning that Dina is pregnant, Abby was about to kill her. She says, good. But then Lev is the one who insists that Abby spare them. And Abby says, I better not see your face again. So sometime later, Ellie and Dina are living on a farm, taking care of Dina's baby. So at least 9 months, I feel like a year later. But Ellie suffers from post-traumatic stress. When Tommy arrives with information on Abby's whereabouts, Ellie leaves for Santa Barbara to kill her despite Dina's pleas. Abby and Lev arrive in Santa Barbara searching for the Fireflies, but are captured by the Rattlers, slave-keeping bandits. Ellie is injured in a Rattler trap on her way to look for Abby, but escapes and rescues Abby and Lev, who have been weakened by weeks of torture, hanging on kind of, yeah, I mean, it reminded me of the Romans and crucifixion, basically. Threatening to kill Lev, Ellie forces Abby to fight her. Ellie overpowers her, losing 2 fingers in the process, but she ends up letting her live, which we'll talk about. Ellie returns to the farmhouse, finds it empty, except for, I guess, a breakup room, because it's got all of Ellie's stuff in there. She plays Joel's guitar, which she can't really because she's missing her pinky and her ring finger. And she recalls her promise to Joel to try to forgive him and leaves. And that's where we end it there.
My God.
I know,
I'm
indeed.
exhausted. That was just Wikipedia.
That was just Wikipedia, yeah. And I had to fill in some blanks there, but I feel like people who are going to be watching / listening to this, I guess they're either going to be doing it because they're fans of either one of us, but also because they have some sort of connection with the game. So I feel okay that I think you have some context with what's going on. What is your history with The Last of Us, like the whole thing, I guess?
Well, I was one of those foolish people who bought a PlayStation 3 last go around. So I think there were like maybe 3 games I had for it. I finished none of them. Yakuza 3, Valkyria Chronicles. And so when The Last of Us came out, it was one of the last games for the system, which is basically what happened again here. So my eyes were on it, but not, by that time it was 2013. I was pretty much done with zombies. It was all zombied out. But then I saw the review scores for The Last of Us. It was just perfect scores, like down the line. I'd never seen anything like that before. So it was actually that compelled me to buy it, which is very basic, but it turned out to be the right choice because it was such a profound experience, and I really hadn't played anything like that. It felt like such a massive sea change, and I remember that year. There was a lot going on in media. I had just seen a movie called Gravity, which was like the most cinematic movie experience of all time. Breaking Bad had ended, which was like one of the greatest TV endings of all time. And The Last of Us was just like so much more affecting to me, like this video game. I remember when video games were Kirby Double Attack for the Nintendo 64. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I was there for the evolutionary steps, but still, I mean, it was such a moment, and I instantly became one of those annoying people who watches The Wire and says, you got to watch The Wire. I said, you got to play The Last of Us. So I foisted it upon one of my friends, and later played it with a college roommate, and yeah, I was hooked in an ironic way, as we'll talk about, because at the end, I said, but that was it though. And we can talk about that later.
Yeah. And we have a connection because you actually sent Donovan the copy of it, of The Last of Us, that I had been peer pressuring him to finally open and play. So we have that connection as well. So yeah, you very much push, I guess in like drug terminology, you push Last of Us and, open up a trench coat. It's a worthwhile, it's not like you're doing something terrible to humanity. You're trying to give them this beautiful work to actually play. Yeah, mine is, I've talked about it before, but it's been, I don't know, 4 years, I guess, since I talked about it. And I'm just a Naughty Dog fan through and through. And so but I don't like survivor horror. So I was nervous about pre-ordering it, but I thought, I'll give it a shot. And I remember starting it and Sarah dies. And then I maybe progressed a little bit more. And then I thought, I don't think I can play this right now. And then it took like 3 years for me to do it, and I started over and everything. So and now I'm just a huge fan of it. And of course, now I've played Resident Evil 2, which I really loved, but I don't know that I'd call myself a survival horror fan. But I enjoy them more than I initially did. And I think I've taken some steps to being able to play them at night, which
Ooh,
normally I can't play them at night. I get really nervous about that. Just another pimp of your show. You had an episode of this on, isn't it called Battle for Beyond Planet X? You have to correct me.
close enough. It's very complicated. The Battle Beyond Planet X,
Okay. Yes.
which is
And
just a
then do
mix
you
of two
remember
something.
what episode that was? Because I listened to it recently, actually.
Uh, maybe it was one of the early ones, maybe like
Okay.
episode 11 or something.
Yeah, and you'd be able to search online because that's how I found it if you look at The Last
Yeah.
of Us. But Harry actually goes into, he talks about the ending and yeah, all of the things. So I do recommend like that. Um I guess would you want to talk, even though I put it later, would you want to talk about what we thought about the ending and
The ending
uh
of the
the
original.
first one? Yeah.
The ending was actually kind of where I begin to think about the original Last of Us, because the way I appreciate that game as an overall experience is kind of as a short story, which is going to be quite the contrast to the new game. But um, I know this wasn't how the game was made, but it appears to me that they had this idea for a really strong, high concept zombie game, and so tracking back to the incept point where it's like, okay, this has to be a zombie game, it has to be a post-apocalyptic game. Um, that's it's kind of like a reverse marketing thing where it's like you have to have this zombie game, which again I was very tired of, in order to get to this great like the hook is at the end, it's not at the beginning.
Mm.
And it was just it kind of felt like the quintessential zombie story. It was like that's the one that should have always been there, because of course, as mentioned in the summary, it is the story of this guy who chooses his daughter essentially over the survival of mankind. And I was like, wow, that was such a gut punch.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it I mean the whole game itself is building up to that moment essentially. You go through all these adventures with this character, and the relationship is becomes concrete. And so it wasn't just a game where the relationship becomes concrete at the end. It becomes concrete for this like really messed up uh hook, essentially, I call it. And the way it ends, it's like it ends on this note where the last cutscene is Ellie, confronts Joel, and she's like, "Is it true what you said that like they had found a cure? There are so many different people that they were going to experiment on." He was like, "Yes," and it ends on that famous shot where she says, "Okay," and it's left ambiguous, which I kind of have mixed feelings about. I kind of would prefer it if it was a little bit less ambiguous, that she actually just bought into it, because she is at the end of the day a child. I mean, I think that that's kind of important to remember. Um, and it's just like, oh my God, that was so, like, it was just so strong that I was like, I immediately just said, there should never be a Last of Us 2. And I think that was the reaction for a lot of people. I don't know. Did you feel similarly?
How to, yeah, I think at the time that I recorded the other episode, it been announced at that point.
Mm,
So I think we were taking some guesses as to what happened. But when I played it, I think initially when I first played it, the one of the reasons why I thought I don't know if I can handle this at this moment is because you're like following this. Well, first you're Sarah in the
yeah,
house, and then Sarah dies, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's happening here? So I felt like there's a gut punch there at the beginning. But yeah, when it ends, like number one, you slaughtered all those people. You killed Marlene, which you had to do because you weren't controlling Joel, and then you lied to Ellie. And I personally liked the ambiguity, though I was leaning towards she knew that he like there was clear doubt in her
yeah,
face, the pixels that were making up her face. But I guess I wanted to know what their like how would this impact or affect their relationship going forward. But I don't know that because I kind of see the first ending similar to the second ending because it's unresolved too. I think a lot of it with part two. But part two is more unsettling than part one because part one they're in a pretty good place in the sense that they're alive, they're back at Jackson, so they'll have a settlement. So it is a really fully formed game, and I can see what you're saying of yeah, don't make a part two. Think of all the controversies that we would have been saved from if they hadn't made a part two. But yeah. I said, because I was listening back to that podcast because I didn't remember what I said. I was okay with his choice as a player, but morally, I thought it was a wrong choice.
Mm,
And even more strongly now, I think it be just because of what happens. I think I see that as well. But you're just spending your time seeing these two characters who are physically in game space so far apart, and also figuratively, and then as they start to come closer together, and you're so on board with that relationship that it's hard to watch that happen at the end for him to lie. And as you said at the podcast episode that you made, I thought was really well said, that he makes this loving choice, but it also turns him into a monster. So you
yeah.
think of him as a hero, but really he does make the bad choice, and he dooms humanity, I suppose, for everything, because we certainly haven't found any other immune person. So yeah, whew.
And I think that that's the direction they went with The Last of Us Part Two is was sensible, but
Yeah,
I was not able to predict it. And I think my worry going into a potential sequel was that you have that now moral dilemma that probably doesn't wouldn't hold up to scrutiny, or so I thought, that you cannot start taking that apart. You cannot start humanizing these characters all of a sudden again, um, because on the last episode of your show where you talked about The Last of Us, you had queried the room and asked, like, do you agree with Joel's choice? And people kind of said, like, yeah, I think there is a lot of sympathy for Joel, but um, I mean, I hate to make this metaphor or this analogy, but it's kind of an abortion
mm,
situation. And once you sort of apply, I mean, at least that's where my mind went. And once you sort of apply the principles of that argument to what happens in this game, it kind of starts to fall apart, which is why the end point is really like safe. Okay, now we're done. Like that, the point was made. And so, funnily enough, like one of the theories going around about what the future of the franchise is, because no video game can truly exist alone. It's got to be an
sure.
IP. Was going to be like, well, what's Bill up to? Like, Bill does not factor
Oh,
into this game at all. The scope has so
yeah.
greatly expanded that it's so ambitious, and so just for that alone, the sequel is definitely warranted. And so my mind was, I don't know how I'm still kind of feeling about the existence of a part two, but obviously
Mhm.
we'll talk that through.
Yeah, I think I may have been conditioned to want a happy ending, because a lot like the Uncharted series, for the most part, each of the games ends happily.
Mm.
There might be sections in the middle that, oh, like in Uncharted 3, you realize that Nate and Elena were married, but clearly they're estranged now, but then they get back together. So, and then 4 ends beautifully with them together. They have a daughter. And so I feel like when I was playing this, that I wanted that also to, have a happy ending. And I think with Last of Us, which is, I think, indicative of just the world in general, this post-pandemic world, really, you don't have many happy endings, if such a thing actually exists. And so that's why I was just unsettled. And so you want something more, but I need to stop wanting something more, because I think I get my heart set on stuff and then it doesn't happen. So that might be uh what happened there. But yeah, that ending it's so, and because who, man, you've got the music there. They're overlooking Jackson. He takes a beat to say yes in the lie, and then there's the beat, and she's like, okay. And whoo, boy, yeah. So it's very powerful. It's very powerful. Well, before we get in, because we're going to talk lots and lots about that with part 2 and 3, I suppose. Just as a baseline, so listeners and viewers get a sense of where we're coming at this. Are we one of those rabid haters or rabid lovers who are in between? As a baseline, did you, and we talked about this, enjoy, like the game? I'm not set on those words because I think it's really difficult to say that with this particular game. But did you have a good time playing it?
I mean, yeah, that's actually been part of the discourse for this game, and maybe part of the messaging even from Naughty Dog, that this is not really a game that you pick up and play and enjoy the
Yeah.
way a lot of games function now, like Destiny, where it's a very casual experience. You're sort of like, even in the commercials, you got people like joking around, haha, this isn't really for serious, which is alienating to me because I'm still old school nerd game. I don't know, but so did I enjoy the game? I don't know. There was actually a lot of frustrating aspects, and so I don't know that necessarily I buy into the idea that it was frustrating on purpose. And we can talk about that with the gameplay, because that was really my issue. I really loved the loop of The Last of Us, the original. And I know one of the criticisms about Naughty Dog games is that they're kind of like interactive movies almost. And I get that, like hardcore stealth game players might look down their noses at The Last of Us, but it was the only stealth game I could play, which shocked me when Donovan was like doing the hunt and peck trying to play that game. But I really liked it. I loved the idea that you had just enough resources to like navigate these puzzles, where you had to interact with clickers a certain way, you had to interact with runners a certain way, and they threw in a lot of wrenches into the formula for this game. That part on purpose, but it kind of left me at a loss in terms of how to adapt to it, which is maybe just a second replay would be more rewarding, and obviously you could speak to that. But and then of course there's the narrative elements, like the brutality and the violence level, and that I think in order for it to be successful, sure, maybe the game can't be enjoyable, and so that is also a consideration. But I was affected by the narrative at least, so at that point, does enjoyment factor in? I don't know, but the gameplay, just isolating the gameplay, I did not have as good a time as I did last time.
The first time. Okay. And it took me, so you've only played it once, correct? Okay, so I have played it twice now. I just finished my second, but I could not go one on top of the other. I like took a week break. I was deeply affected by it. Like the day after I finished the first run, I was in this puddle of depression, and I'm not being dramatic at all. I actually didn't eat that whole day. It was rough. And whenever I thought of the song Future Days, if I would like get physically ill, it was really rough. I think that it's an amazing game. I don't think it's a perfect game. I do have some issues with it. And I was completely engaged, but like I said, that like and enjoy word,
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard, like something that is this brutal and some bad stuff that happens that you do not want to participate in, but the player, like you are forced to participate in. It was rough, but so there's an engagement level, I guess. I was fully engaged and affected by it. Yeah. And it took you said about 20, low 20s.
I would estimate 25. I was going to go back and check, but then I remembered that the last maybe 3 hours was just a stretch, and there's no final save, I don't think. So I didn't get the full count. So I'd say estimate 25.
Okay. And the first time I played, if you had watched my Instagram stuff, 34 the first time and then 25 this second go. So part of it was probably because I didn't have to explore as much because I already knew what was about to happen. And then, yeah, I did say, what were your feelings after playing in my little notes there? Because you said you were affected by it. I mean, did you fall into any sort of blue state, melancholia, anything?
No, I was not quite affected that way. And actually, I found the coda or the epilogue, or however you want to quantify it, of this game quite Return to the King-ish. And so I was pretty
Mm,
exhausted by the end. Again, maybe that's the point.
yeah.
But I mean, I think that was kind of clouding the intended effect, because
Okay.
I could sort of academically understand what was happening. It was very, very powerful, and
Hmm.
the acting at the final moments and everything like that. But after a certain point, there was a sort of rising absurdity of like, okay, now we're back at the farm again. I see. Is this game ever going to end?
Yeah.
Um, but overall, it definitely left me with probably more feelings than thoughts,
Yeah.
which might be frustrating to the critics, perhaps, like us.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, and I have been delving into lots of articles just to see what people think, and I've been watching interviews with the cast and everything, and it's interesting to get people's takes on it. And sometimes I agree, and sometimes I don't. And we were talking last night about something we had seen from Mashup, and I think it's hard. I think we've come down to it that you can't fit this game into a particular box. It just breaks all sorts of molds. And so if people are trying to judge it by one thing, it doesn't really fit. And so we're going to try to take a roundabout and just look at it. And we're not putting it in a box. We're just going to look at it in any way that we can. But before we get into that, I think it's good to talk about the real world background and context to this game. And you said it well when we were prepping for this. Why is that important? You know, why should we even bother looking at what had been going around with the company and then leading up to it?
For whatever reason, I'm not a huge gamer actually, and obviously I would never identify as such. Um, but for whatever reason, I still keep up with like what's going on in the games world, and so I would not have thought to have brought this into the discussion if not for listening to specifically Waypoint Radio. Um, I kind of I don't listen to them that much anymore, but they seemed to me at least to be a big voice talking about unionization in games and why that's so important, challenging the people they spoke to at E3 or various events to, you know, what is your stance on the industry abuse that's going on? Because games are a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think in like 2018, it was like gamers as a whole spent like $42 billion.
Mm.
It's like, wow, and yet there's all this stuff going on where it seems like the money just does not trickle down to the labor. And so there's a lot that goes on in terms of abuse, in terms of sexual harassment, video games experienced alongside comics and TV. I think like a second round of Me Too most recently, a few weeks ago, I say. But even before then, I mean, this has been an ongoing discussion in terms of there was an article in Time that appeared online June 11th, 2019, where they spoke to a former Telltale employee, because of course everybody's a former Telltale employee, where he actually developed an ulcer because he was just so stressed
Mm.
out and there was just no safety net. And then of course that company laid everybody off. Really horrible story. Um, Around the same time, the chief executive of Rockstar Games, people who bring you Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, bragged that Red Dead Redemption 2, like people were putting in 100-hour weeks to put out that game. And it's true, like games these days are so big that you you just imagine the painstaking labor that goes into all the detailing in Laura Croft's luscious hair. And it's just like, I want to think about that. 150 workers walked out of Riot Games, League of Legends, because of allegations of sexism. People who worked on Mortal Kombat 11 developed post-traumatic stress disorder because I mean, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
And you know, unfortunately for us, Naughty Dog is no exception. I mean, there were allegations of abuse. The crunch is unbelievable. The Last of Us 2, of course, suffered so much. You would call it development hell because that's kind of what it is, but obviously that term means something else. But yeah, I mean, it was a mess for them too.
Yeah, and it's a cycle, which is ironic because you know one of the themes of this
Yeah.
whole game is the cycle of violence, but I feel like it gets worse as the company gets more popular and Naughty Dog has such great and well-selling games behind it that there's this pressure, and so the pressure to keep up then falls down to the laborers, and then it's just terrible. So as things get great, the labor gets higher. It's yeah. Yeah, I read that about the Mortal Kombat 11 and just like producing all those gruesome scenes, like oh boy, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think some similar things may have happened. It seemed unsubstantiated. I did read something about it where they did have to look up, you know, certain wounds or things, which I could probably believe given, I mean, we sent some screenshots of like blown up corpses between each other, and it was pretty horrifying. You know, if you shot an explosive arrow at someone, what would happen?
Ugh.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Does it seem though that people like us, but I guess besides us, because we do care, the consumer, do they care sort of the sweat and labor and blood that has gone into these games? How
five
widespread is
years
the
ago.
knowledge of this? Sorry.
I mean, 5 years ago, you asked that question. I think the answer was no. One of the people on the forefront bringing that narrative into the mainstream has been Jason Schreier, formerly of Kotaku, who wrote a book called, I think, actually Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which is pretty good. He talks about development of Uncharted 4, I think,
Mm.
games like Mass Effect Andromeda, The Witcher 3, and a few indie games. And I mean, it's always cool to like sort of get behind the scenes, but one of the recurring themes is, of course, the labor. And he published a number of, you'd call them exposés about like, why was Dragon Age 2 a disaster, sort of critically. Why did Mass Effect Andromeda turn out the way it was? Why did Anthem turn out the way it was? And he did one about The Last of Us Part Two, about the culture of crunch. And I think over the course of the few years that he's been reporting on stories like these, gamers have sort of developed a sympathy for the people who make games, which in the past has just never existed. Certainly they gather around cults of personality like Hideo Kojima, David Cage, people like that. But when it comes to the grunts, and especially when it comes to women in games, like we all remember, Jade Raymond, sorry, I think, who was the creative lead on the original Assassin's Creed. I mean, it was hard for women to be in games because of the audience itself. So, I mean, yeah, definitely it's worth identifying a point of conflict with the very people who play these games. But I think that is starting to change.
Yeah, that's good. It's interesting though. I feel like it's normalized almost to a certain extent. And I think about my time because I have a classics degree, but I also have a degree in architecture. And the culture of crunch, it was not called that, but it was there. It was there in studio. It was called charrette. It was the week leading up in studio to final deadlines. And it gets the French name. Charrette means cart, so on the cart. And it gets its name from the École des Beaux-Arts. And there are these images of students hanging on the cart because the cart would go by and you have to put your project in the cart back then. And so people are hanging on the cart trying to finish up. And so, we call it charrette, but people are staying up late, trying to finish up their models and everything. And so it's other places too, but that was normal. It's not, no one was fighting and saying we shouldn't have charrette at studio. So I'm glad that things are starting to come out now and when we're getting a sense. So it seems like also there's pushback from the non-grunts, that, oh, that's not our culture and things like that. What will it take to change this? That's kind of a hard question. This is like questions we don't have answers. But I mean, what can we, besides now getting the word out so we can, hopefully support, I mean, what do the companies and studios need to do in order to get rid of this crunch culture?
I think if you do ask insiders, they'll say unionization. I think Games Workshop is either they're the people who make Warhammer 40K or they're the people who are trying to unionize. I can't really keep the names separate, but yeah, there is definitely an organization out there that's trying to do this because you're right. I mean, the normalization is kind of like the final mile almost. I mean, video games are such a creative, passionate industry where you, for outsiders especially, you say like, well, you get to like make and play video games all day, like don't complain. And even the people inside kind of have internalized that mythology that like, well, this isn't really labor, and what we consider to be labor in this country is obviously very skewed. But that culture that has been bred since like the boom days with like id Software and the party guys, that makes it difficult for people to speak out on all sorts of issues, labor and harassment. And so I guess the question for us also, not only what can we do, which I guess just sort of keep your head down and pay attention to these stories, but how does it affect us as gamers? Like when you're playing a lot of these AAA games, I mean, we both played Shadow of the Tomb Raider, another huge game. Like, are you sort of conscious of this? Does it affect your experiences?
Yeah, I think now it is more so. And this is interesting. I kind of connected to J.K. Rowling's, and that sort of thing. So it's not death of the author now, but like death of the studio. Can you separate, what you are playing and engaging in with what was used to create that? And I think I will honestly say that no. When I was playing The Last of Us or even Tomb Raider, I think I was just like so disengaged from that. But as I learn more and more, I think I am starting to wake up. Does that mean that do we stop? Do we stop purchasing those, in support of them? Is that something to help them? I don't know. I don't know what it is, or get the word out somehow and do that. But then if you're getting the word out but you're still playing it, is that sort of a double talk, a double speak right there? Yeah, it's hard. I'm not sure. What about you?
I think boycotts, I mean, it's tough because you definitely want to do something. And as consumers in a capitalist society, that is kind of our only voice to a certain extent. But I understand how like employee bonuses work, that they're kind of dependent not only on certain sales numbers, but also Metacritic scores.
Mm,
And so like the
gosh.
people who made the original Destiny were promised like a certain bonus if the game received like an 80 and it got like a 71. And so there's
Oh,
no
wow.
bonus for you guys. That's a recurring theme across
Yeah.
multiple companies. So yeah, I mean,
That's like
it's
report
heartbreaking.
card grades.
I
Okay,
know.
junior, if you get all A's, you get, some money there. Interesting.
Yeah. And then, like
Yikes.
what pressure that suddenly might be put on the people at like IGN, who it's like, oh, my honest evaluation of this game now is going to affect somebody's like
Yeah.
it's bizarre. The whole system is very icky once you start to like read about it. But I mean, for me, like a lot of games during this console generation have like photo mode, which I think is kind of like a backdoor way of like getting you to stop and appreciate all the tremendous artistry that goes
Sure.
into the
Yeah.
game. I didn't take any pictures in The Last of Us Part 2. I don't know if that was other than the things that I sent you, which was
Hmm.
like a person's severed arm because it was just so extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that certainly the violence is something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of someone had to create this. Like, was
Yeah,
there one person designing Joel and his bloody and bashed in head? And how would that affect you if you had to stare at that, day in and day out to make it accurate?
yeah,
So I am thinking about that. And I feel like I appreciate those people who work on it, though they can't get that in physical form or monetary value from that. But I do honestly view many video games, Last of Us Part 2 being true to that, as an art form. And that's why it took me 34 hours, because I was ridiculously always turning the camera around and looking at the faces of the character that I was playing, or just looking at the beauty in this really messed up world that you were living in. Like, I really appreciate the work that they went to for that, and I feel bad,
I know.
which again doesn't help them, but I just feel terrible that they have to put up with these terrible conditions in order to produce that for us to enjoy it.
I know. As a start, and we'll talk about the complications even further that they have to experience. But yeah, a lot of jaw-dropping moments in this
Hmm.
game. It's absolutely stunning. Um, and I think maybe one of the things is that for a long time, gamers have been especially bad about sort of knowing about those people. I think it helps to sort of put names to or faces to names that you see in the credits that you don't watch because they go on forever. But like a lot of my favorite like visual artists come from video games, and I just it's hard for me to sort of remember because they keep such low profiles. Maybe necessarily so. Maybe that's just part of the conditions of their work environment. But games like Metroid Prime, like that's such a gorgeous game and some of the most extraordinary sci-fi visuals. And then of course with The Last of Us Part 2, like, again, it's unbelievable to look at. And so doing that bit of research, learning the names of the artists and the actors is important, but it can also backfire, as we'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that because you're saying that it's like people are more supportive now. The word is getting out there, but as we've seen, there is this, and I went through this moment of I was talking with Carolyn Coco, which you know her, and I was thinking, are there more of these people, sort of the terrible people, we'll just call them, the terrible human beings? Are there more of them than I really imagined? Or is it just that it's this small cadre and their voice is just really loud? And so she thinks it's the latter, and I think I've come to think that as well, but they're so loud. But how do these people perpetuate? And I don't really know how else to call them. We'll just call them terrible human beings, because they might be more than the white male entitled group. But do you think
Definitely.
that they're perpetuating this? Do you think that they're also in this group of support, or not really? Because I'm just thinking of Zoe, whose name I has with the Gamergate.
Zoe Quinn.
Yes, thank you. And Anita Sarkeesian, and clearly there was no support there with those sorts of things, and we know we'll talk about it, of course, with Neil and Laura. How are these people adding to any industry abuse, or do you think it's just like separate things?
Hmm. I mean, I think it probably is worth making a distinction there. Um, it's kind of just like they're beset on all sides. These people who make video games, again, this passionate thing that you get into because you want to do it, not because
Yeah.
it's a paycheck. And then it's like to be sort of between a rock and a hard place. It's just like it's a cruel irony. But at the same time, like I also agree with Professor Coca and you that they are a minority. But of course, given the nature of social media
Yeah.
and the ways in which people can review bomb things, like the loudest voices, I mean, they rise to the top.
Yeah.
Just the infrastructure that's set up.
Yeah. Anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of industry abuse before we get into the timeline?
Yeah, I know. Is there? Can we leave the segment on a light note? I don't know.
I
I
know
don't think
that
there
we
is
hope it'll
anything.
get better.
Yeah, and I think steps are being taken
Yeah.
to that end, but we just got to keep an eye out on it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And sexual harassment and all of these terrible things that have, I mean, racism, that seems to not really be getting any better. But I feel like Me Too, it has really brought things to the forefront, has pushed things forward. So I think once there's like this hit and information gets out, it seems like this really terrible time. But then it's like, this is actually good because now we know what's happening and we can start to reform it. So I feel like if we can go from this bottom where now we know there are these terrible things and push it and figure out how to make it better. So that's why I'm hoping. I feel like that was not well spoken at all, but hopefully
No,
people
no,
understand what I'm talking about.
I got it. I mean, to the episode, in other words, the night of the living dead is always darkest before the dawn of the dead.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Yeah. The Night of the Living Dead. Okay, so I also just want to go through, the timeline of this game because I think that some might think, why? Why do we even care? But there are some really interesting things that happen here. And some of them are kind of knock on your head, like, oh, I should have realized that maybe Abby was going to be an important part in this game. Um, and yes, okay, so we'll start at the beginning. So The Last of Us released June 14th, 2013. Left Behind, the DLC with Ellie as its protagonist, came out February 14th, 2014. And then The Last of Us Remastered for PS4 was July 29th, 2014. Now, late July, which I found from YouTube, 28th of July 2014, was when they had The Last of Us One Night Live, which if you haven't watched it, I really recommend it. But live music from Gustavo. I Gustavo S. I'll do so I don't butcher his name and seem disrespectful. And then Ashley and Troy were there, and the actress who played Marlene, whose name I should have actually some here, Merle Dandridge, and then Sarah was also there. And so they acted out scenes, and in between the scenes, you have Gustavo playing it. So one night, literally live, and they videotaped everything except for the epilogue. And this epilogue is actually nearly exact to the prologue of The Last of Us 2, where Joel is playing, he's talking to Ellie and he plays Future Days. So Future Days actually happened. That's where it all began. Early development of The Last of Us Part 2 begins while Naughty Dog is fully working on Uncharted 4, which there was some scandal with that as well, but this is not about Uncharted, so you don't have to talk about it. And then Uncharted 4 is released in May 2016, so now Lu 2 is in full development. Bruce Straley actually took a sabbatical because he was burned out from Last of Us and Uncharted 4, and then he just departs in 2017. So then they bring on Westworld's Hallie Gross as an additional writer to assist Druckmann with a narrative, and then Anthony Newman and Kurt Margiano were chosen as additional directors. In 2016, December at PSX, Lu 2 is officially announced. They show a trailer. This is where Ellie is playing guitar, singing through the valley amidst bloodied bodies, so you get a sense of what it's going to be like. Joel shows up. I think this might have been when you thought he was a ghost.
Ghost Dad. Well, I shouldn't say that.
And she gives her quote that I think many people knew of, I'm going to find and kill every last one of them. So I think it's interesting to go back now and look at this, because now you should be like, absolutely, this should have been a violent game, because that was one of the first things she said. Druckmann does say at that point that it is a revenge story or stories that revolves around hate, and Ellie is the protagonist 5 years after the first game. So remember that, because Harry and I are going to talk about it. Revolves around hate.
Mm.
December 2016, there is an image of older Ellie and her tattoo designed by Natalie Hall shown. And I will say that this tattoo, I would say it went viral, but so many people got that tattooed on their arms. And I was recently thinking, I wonder if any of them regret it because
I
they,
know.
they saw the leaks or they hated the game. And now that tattoo is on you forever. So I thought about that. Throughout 2016, 2017, you got Naughty Dog working as multiple teams because they are working on Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. And then once that was released in August 2017, both of those teams were merged, and the entire studio was then their main focus working on Lu 2. And then the team began working on motion capture in 2017, which probably meant that the majority of the game's story had been complete. Then in October of 2017, on the 16th, Kotaku reports that a former Naughty Dog employee says he was fired after filing a sexual harassment complaint. Did you posted this? You want to summarize that or anything, or any big points you would like to talk about with that?
Uh, Nothing too major, just that I think that kind of colors a lot of people's not discourse, but sort of discussion when it comes to Naughty Dog. That for such a long time it was considered like such a unimpeachable, like this is one of the good studios. And I think it's been difficult for fans to kind of, not that necessarily their feelings are the only ones that matters. Obviously, this guy, has a story to tell, but it certainly cast a shadow alongside what happened with Uncharted 4. So yeah, it unfortunate to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seemed like, I don't know if that's been resolved, but it seemed like he wasn't as believed.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Do
that
you
happens
remember?
sometimes.
Yeah, it was, well, I could be wrong. I remember reading that when that came out, but yeah, we still have a ways to come with sexual harassment. And it doesn't happen to men very often. So
I know,
that's
yeah.
also startling because it's normally, so see, it does happen to men. That goes back to my thoughts once I saw Bombshell.
Oh,
Paris Games Week, November 2017, they have the another trailer. I was trying to, the most violent trailer I've ever seen. I don't know. But I remember seeing it. I remember there was a news article after that, and I can't remember by whom it was written, but the tagline was like, I saw the new trailer and it made me sick, that sort of thing.
yeah.
But this is the one where you've got unknown woman who happens to be Abby hanging up. Yara's arm is smashed by a hammer, which when I was playing it, I had to look away. And
Yeah.
then a woman gets a hammer to the head. So that trailer comes out. So it reveals these four characters: Emily, which she doesn't really, it's just that. The Seraphite that gets killed, Yara, Lev, and then this unnamed woman now is voiced by Laura Bailey. So clearly, and they have a discussion, I think Hannah Hart was the moderator for that. They didn't even say who the unnamed woman was, but it's Laura Bailey. So, it's got to be a significant character. So it's like, here we go again. Writing was on the wall, people. We should have
Yeah.
realized what it was going to be like. Troy and Ashley sing Wayfaring Stranger at PSX December 2017. There's an extended gameplay trailer at E3 2018. And this was a big one because it introduces players to Dina. You've got a shared kiss between Dina and Ellie. And then you also see how quick and agile Ellie is, and also just fighting, because this is one of her first encounters with the scars. So also some violence there. So again, we should have been prepared for the violence, probably. Date reveal at State of Play, September 2019. You have Joel at the end. So if people thought Joel was going to die, he's actually there. February 2020 was the first date that we had. So it's going to come out on the 20th. Nearly a week later, which is interesting because there are annoying people on Twitter, everyone knows. But I remember when they were posting different things, and I subscribe to Naughty Dog, so it'll usually pop up. But replies were ridiculous. Before the first date ever came out, I was like, release date, release, all of that annoying stuff. And
Yeah.
I knew what Neil was doing, because you don't want to be the person who puts out a release date and then you have to delay it. I mean, hashtag cyberpunk, am I right? But sorry, I know people are excited. I have no
I guess
emotional
so.
attachment to that. So it's
No.
more funny now that it keeps getting delayed. But yeah, so it happened, but he didn't want to happen. So nearly a week later, they delayed it to May 29th. And according to Neil Druckmann, this was done in order for the team to, quote, bring the entire game up to a level of polish we could call Naughty Dog quality, end quote. And the delay was likely also in part related to allegations that Naughty Dog has a terrible crunch culture, with a 12-hour workday seemingly lasting for months on end. In March, or on March 12th, 2020, Kotaku report by Jason Schreier. This is the man that you said wrote the book, correct? Same
He'll come
author?
back into the story. Yep.
Okay. He wrote, as Naughty Dog crunches on The Last of Us Part 2, developers wonder how much longer this approach can last. That article. Do you want to say anything about that particular article?
It's definitely worth a look. Not only again for the behind the scenes, but just the sort of the personal side of burnout that can happen even in video games.
Yeah.
I really like his reporting.
April 2nd, the game is now delayed indefinitely due to the coronavirus. So as this was happening, there is an early April leak from 4chan. And for this person, I mean, this one makes me laugh, honestly, but people fell into the trap. So I guess I shouldn't laugh. I guess it's okay now because it's past. But this person said that they were an immediate family member of someone who works at Naughty Dog. And let me just say that these leaks, as well as the 26th leaks, which are more legitimate, I had a time finding them for the research for this podcast, because you can't find them now, which is ironic because they were
It is.
everywhere. And you had to protect yourself, which we'll talk about. But here we go. So the 4chan leaks from early April. The leaker begins by describing the game's first act, citing that it follows Ellie and Dina falling for each other, while Ellie also sorry, while Ellie also begins to mend her distant relationship with Joel. That's kind of true. Who has
Yeah.
been at odds with his young companion due to his controlling nature. The leaker then claims that a religious cult called the Seraphites attack Ellie's group, killing Dina and many others in their campaign to purge the world. According
Yep.
to the leak, the group are deeply religious, white supremacists who believe homosexuality is a sin, and supposedly killed Dina because of her relationship with Ellie. Which
Wow.
many people thought that Dina was going to kick the bucket, honestly.
I did.
Allegedly, which you and I think we're both scared. This leads Ellie on a revenge mission against the cult, supposedly seeing two companions join her throughout her adventure. The first is Jesse, Dina's former boyfriend, and the second is, of course, Joel. The
Of
leaker
course.
suspiciously claims that these two characters simply die at separate points in the story, not going into any detail, despite the fact that Joel's death would almost certainly have significant ramifications on the narrative as a whole. That's true. The leak also claims that the woman in the mysterious second trailer for the game is Ellie's mother, who supposedly conceived the protagonist with one of the members of the cult, as they are allegedly immune to the virus.
I think that was my first thought too, that must be Ellie's mom and this is a flashback or something. But
Yeah.
it's funny looking back at this leak to see just how much of it was just extrapolation from the promotional materials that already existed, that like, okay, there's a religious cult, Dina's probably dead, let's just go from there. And the
Yeah.
story ended up being similar but very, very different.
Indeed. I know that in Uncharted 4, at the very end, when you're playing as I can't remember her name now, but it's Nate and Elena's daughter. There's a
Okay.
poster for American Daughters, in the same art style as Left Behind, the American Dreams. And it has like Dark Horse. And so people, and it's like this pregnant woman with a gas mask. And so people thought, oh, is
Oh.
that Ellie's mom? Is that Abby? But it wasn't. It was just a fun little thing. I do know, I don't know if it was connected with this one or the later ones, but there was also the leak or the rumor that Abby was transgender. And then Joel's death was rumored to be much later in the game, which we come to find out was not true. So those are, yeah, so those were the 4chan leaks, which people read and to a certain extent bought into. So we laugh about it now, but those ruin people's lives, really. But then we have April 26th, and I put in all capitals, the leaks, which were more legitimate because they were based on actual videos and screenshots. They originated on YouTube, but they were taken down uh, immediately on the side of Neil Druckmann and that crew. But it takes, there's a delay, so it was probably up there for an hour, and then of course that can be disseminated very quickly. And then they were originally thought to be from a disgruntled Naughty Dog employee, but later it was revealed to be an outside party. That's all I could find so far because I mean, now it's going to be an ongoing criminal investigation to a certain extent. So,
Wow.
so what were the leaks? And then I already said how hard it was to find because boy, it sure was. So the game will feature 2 playable protagonists. The first half sees you playing as Ellie, while the second one features Abby, who was first introduced in a trailer for The Last of Us Paris Games Week. And then the leak level list shows proof of this, which you can check out. So, because there's 3 days of Seattle with Ellie and 3 with Abby. At some point in the game, you will fight Ellie as you play Abby. That's true. Dina is pregnant, with Jesse being the father. True. These 2 characters were first introduced in the story trailer. Dina is also planning to start a family with Ellie and the baby. That's true. Joel dies from a beating from Abby, as shown in the streamable link above. I didn't click on that. This scene is then confirmed in a conversation between Ellie and Dina, as Dina mentions that both Jesse and Joel are dead. So that's true. Abby and Ellie will face off, with Dina joining sometime in between, kind of. However, Abby proves to be more than a match for both as she beats them soundly. Before she's about to kill Dina, Ellie pleads for her to stop. As she's about to slit her throat, Abby's companion Lev convinces her not to, and they leave. So that's pretty accurate. Joel's
Wow.
massacre in the first game inadvertently changed Abby's life, as her father is supposedly one of the surgeons he's killed. This would be in line with Abby's motivation for revenge and her killing of Joel. True. Ellie and Abby are both after a cult which attacks the former settlement, while the latter has been in conflict with them too. It is through these chance encounters that Abby becomes aware of Joel and Ellie. Not as accurate. Abby found out about Joel from the Firefly records, while her dad supposedly talked about Ellie with regards to the cure. I guess partially.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But also I think because Owen and Manny were over her father's dead body, they would have also known about Joel too. So she may have just gotten it from all of that. So those were the leaks that happened, as well as videos and images that you could have watched. And then Druckmann, I said he sent a mournful tweet, but after all that happened, he says, "We know the last few days have been incredibly difficult for you. We feel the same. It's disappointing to see the release and sharing of pre-release footage from development. Do your best to avoid spoilers, and we ask that you don't spoil it for others." Yeah, right. The Last of Us Part 2 will be in your hands soon. No matter what you see and hear, the final experience will be worth it. And so that happened the 26th, and the 27th, now we have suddenly a new release date of June 19th, which in my opinion, that was like panic was setting in and we need to get it out there. Would you agree with that?
That's, yeah, I'd say so.
And I also think I put trophies here. The trophy list is really interesting. I had it on my phone. I don't think I need it though. I think that's another symptom or result of it coming out very quickly after that. Just that I think there are 26 trophies or something like that, which seems small compared to, I think there were 50 in the Lost Legacy, and that's like they call it a
Wow.
DLC.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd have to check my numbers again, but just it's a small list. I got the platinum, and I never expected to. Just I do not on the first one because they expect you to do all the difficulties, and I thought I'm not
Oh,
doing that. So it's just an easier list than I would have expected, and I feel like that may have been an issue there. But the trap. So I do want to talk about. I call it the trap. People saw this. I can't tell. I mean, I have a friend who was a victim of this, so I know someone. But either out of interest, I guess, to see what was going to be played, or by accident, they have seen this. And by accident, I mean that people were really mean. So even though he says don't spoil it for others, there could be an Instagram post or just a regular Twitter post that had nothing to do with any of this, maybe just an image or something. And then someone would literally post like, I guess Joel gets killed by Abby and then you play as Abby. And so people were really mean. And the trap is that you love Joel in the first game, despite whatever moral quandaries there may be, right? And what? Joel gets killed and you're playing as his killer? I'm not gonna like this game. I hate this game already. So that is right there the trap. And I don't know how pre-sales were turned around. If they were, I should have done research on that. But how did you protect yourself against falling into this trap or even seeing anything?
I found that I'm pretty good at avoiding spoilers on major media events, even like the newfangled Star Wars movies, which I never really had invested in. I was like, you know what, I'll just stay away from spoilers. And I'm pretty much off Twitter these days. So it was easy for me. I know you had quite a hard time.
Yeah, because I thought, Naughty Dog, because they post like art, and so I love to see the art, development art and things that they have, or they'll highlight someone's cosplay, which such great cosplay that I've seen, and then on Instagram or whatever, and then you just can't, you can only look at it and like go away from it. But even because Google tracks what you look at, I might pull up a new tab and then there's like stuff about Last of Us. So I just
Yeah.
needed to stay away completely for all of that. But the friend that had seen this, he fell into the trap, just that, I'm still gonna play it, but I'm not looking forward to it as much. And I
Wow.
remember him talking about like the Seraphites, and he related it to, I think it's Far Cry 5, because there's kind
Oh
of a
yeah.
group, like a religious group of zealots. I don't know. I think I did some research on it later, but he was just like, oh, they already did that sort of thing. Though I feel like the Seraphites are a bit more well-rounded than that, though there is kind of that bigotry still involved, but we can talk about that. But yeah, this game brought out the worst in people, to be honest. So there's that part. I should also mention that there were strict media embargoes, apparently stricter than normal, just which makes sense, right? Because Joel dies within the first 2 hours, depending on how quickly you play. Which I thought if Joel did die, that'd be at the end. I was expecting him to a certain extent. Um, and then you can't talk about Abby or anything. So I think there were some media outlets a bit upset about that. Oh boy, yeah. June 12th, you've got a Twitter battle between Jason, is it
That should be
Schreier
yeah.
again?
Should be
Okay.
trying.
And Neil Druckmann. And was this the one related to the Schindler's List connection?
Yeah.
Do you want to
Yep.
explain what this weird Twitter battle was? I read it on, yeah, it popped up. I read it online to see what it was. But yeah, would you be able to
Well,
tell us what that one is?
speaking of being beset upon by all sides, I mean, it's just like it's hard because again, Naughty Dog is kind of a complicated entity at this point, but it's hard not to sympathize with them because they worked so hard in this game, putting it out. Um, these leaks happen, and I'm just sitting here sort of stunned by the enormity of how much was leaked. I mean, it's like the whole game,
Yeah.
and the way that interacts with the most hateful of gamers is just it was horrible. So they're getting death threats and harassment. And then, of course, Sony, I imagine, does this embargo thing. And that's part of a long running narrative with embargoes that have just been very restrictive, I think, ever since like Dishonored 2.
Okay.
So that like media critic or game critics are already sort of salty about that. And so now they're getting on this side where you have more classical enthusiasts, let's say, enthusiast press who are like, this is another cinematic masterpiece on, because they called the last game like the Citizen Kane of games, and apparently this one it's been upgraded to Schindler's List, and a lot of people took exception to that, including Jason Schreier, and he sort of spoke out against that very, hyperbolic perhaps statement. Neil took that as like a slight because he saw the earlier reporting as sort of combative. And then Corey Barlog, the director of God of War, which you also played,
Yep.
jumped in. He kind of framed it as very much. He kind of escalated things, and it's just like this is the Last of Us now. Like this is the narrative. Like oh man, it couldn't get any worse. It seemed like.
Yeah, and this is so now you can start drinking, folks. This
Yeah.
every time I was messaging Harry, it was like, I don't understand. This is so weird. I really don't get it. Because people, yeah, they were. all the hateful things that were coming out. Not, first of all, you've got terrible people spoiling it for others, I guess, just out of spite. You have death threats and hateful posts to, I didn't know about Laura Bailey at the time, but certainly Neil Druckmann, because he had been, he posted like certain ones, calling him all sorts of, because he's from Israel. So, of course, the anti Semitic posts were coming out, and anything, any like a, I don't know, a lesbian lover or what, something like that, anything. And it was like, what's going
Insane.
on? What is happening here? Now, to a certain extent, and even Druckmann said this in an interview I was watching, that he totally got it, that you find out from these leaks that Abby kills Joel, and then you're forced to play as Abby. Of course, you would hate that if you're so connected. So I can kind of get that. The whole like homophobic and all of this stuff, and even transphobic, because people thought that Abby was trans, sort of blew my mind, because in Last of Us, I guess there's not necessarily a sense that Ellie is a lesbian, but in Left Behind, it's like clearly there.
Right.
And so I just wonder, like, where is this coming from? You also saw that trailer with Dina. Why is it now happening? It's like, was it all festering and then it sort of exploded? And I thought to myself, I guess I went the route of those snobbish people of like, if you were a true fan, you would have played Left Behind and known this already. But it was so weird. I almost thought about reading out, one of these toxic quotes. And then I thought, I don't really need to put that garbage on here. But there was also, I sent this to you, someone drew a picture in like World War II Nazi Germany style of Neil Druckmann as a Jew, big nose and all of that sort of thing. And I thought, what is this? Why is this like that? It's so bizarre. And then SJW, that popped up a lot. So that this game is just a bunch of garbage, social justice warrior garbage, which confused me a great deal as well, because I know people use these three letters and it's supposed to be a negative thing, but I feel like it's a positive thing. Don't you want the world, don't you want to see people that are like you when you're playing the game? Don't you want video games to represent, to a certain extent, the world that we're living in? And this is where, here's the trigger warning. This is where the white male entitlement, just this idea, I guess, of this small group that they want it a very particular way. They don't like the change that the world is making, and all these new groups. And so anything that is outside of their experience is bad. So I feel it was this small group that made it huge. I mean, there were review bombings the day of. Yeah. And so, but I mean, if you don't know what review bombings are, it's basically, I mean, one person says, let's go on this website and start putting really low scores. I mean, it's happened for Captain Marvel. It happened for, I think, one of the Star Wars. I can't remember which one, but it happened on June 19th. So these were not legitimate reviews, because there's no way that you could have finished it and done that. So it's just, my gosh. So I just don't know of any game that, it's not just the game, it's like the culture surrounding it that just got so crazy and so controversial. Is this for you too? Is this the first time you experienced this sort of thing?
I'd say so, yeah. I read an article, I think yesterday, that compared it to Mass Effect 3, which is the last time that I had been so stunned by the reaction. But that was after people had played the game and were upset by the ending. This is all pre-release stuff.
Yeah.
And I had actually gone back and watched the debut trailer at PSX or E3, whatever it was, with Ellie playing the guitar. And it's such a great video because you get the live audience and everybody's, oh my god, as soon as they see the Firefly symbol, they're like, oh my god, it's The Last of Us 2. And then all the comments like from 4 years ago were like, this is so exciting, and comments from like 1 month ago were like, man, there was just all this hateful stuff. And I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. And it's just the inherent irony, or maybe the double standard of what's going on here, is just it's hard to reckon with, because you don't have people who reconcile with John Wick, the movie, and be like, well, I really like dogs and I know they kill a dog, so I'm not going to see the movie. It's like that doesn't happen. Part of the narrative is that you do feel this way. And it was by design.
Yeah.
He's not trying to trick you by like killing the character and then making you play like the thought process here is just, I mean, obviously so limited. But it does kind of go back and expose a lot of feelings, or how we thought people reacted to the first game, because the original Last of Us was actually praised for its LGBTQ plus themes, specifically with the character Bill. And
Bill,
now
yep.
I can't think about that character now when I think about how much has changed
Yeah.
with normalization of media depiction, because it was like, well, we liked Bill because he wasn't like talking about it. You know, he wasn't like in my face with his gayness. It was subtle. And you know what? That's just not the world we live in. But at the same time, it's hard because, again, beset on all sides. I mean, there is a lot of racial diversity in this game. There are a lot of people of color, and you kill all of them. So
Yeah.
it's like, what kind of diversity are we talking about here? And that's another complicating factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's annoying for me, like, judging something before it comes out.
Yeah,
And I guess they just thought that they had the full picture from those leaks, and now that we know there is, even though it's not really narrative, and there were some that would lead you astray, it is rather complete. But yeah, it was just, man.
it's ugly,
It,
man. Oof.
yeah, the social media was toxic for several months surrounding all of that. And as Druckmann, obviously, I feel bad for him, and I really feel bad for Laura Bailey, frankly. I
Yeah.
mean, we'll talk about Abby, but number one, Abby is a fictional character.
That's
So
what I
if you have
heard.
any hate, I mean, someone should create an Abby Instagram or whatever, and then you can direct it there. I mean, Laura Bailey does a wonderful, wonderful job. There are
Yeah.
some really powerful lines that she delivers, and
Oh,
to attack her, and one of them, I think, even like threatened her child. One of those things that I sent you, and so like once that happens, and I think even you said it, there's no way that you could argue you're a decent human being when you're like doing this sort of thing, and it's I will call it art form, but honestly, it is just a video game. So like to have that sort of take over your life, and the what is it, be all and end all, I think is also a bit toxic. Like you need to take a step back and not have that. Um, and I mean, this is coming from someone who had a day of, depression, deep depression, but I don't let those sorts of things like inform how I'm going to behave towards other people and things like that, however much I might be a fan. So I guess from Harry and I, we apologize for the gamers out there that
absolutely.
we're certainly like that. And I hope that people listening, if you were a fan of this, that you didn't fall into that trap. I feel really bad if you would have. I think I was so excited that I didn't. When I first played as Abby, and we'll talk about this, but I was like, whoa, what is this? This is so weird. And then I thought the game was ending after day 3 in Seattle with Ellie, and then Abby pops up. So I'm so thankful that I did not see any of that, because that was completely new for me. I had a sense, I think, of Joel dying, so that impact I was not as great as I would have thought. Honestly, there were other story beats that I think affected me more, but and
Yeah.
I know that you said the same thing. You sent your little Pokemon Ditto that you were also happy you did not see any of those leaks, and you were pleasantly surprised. Um, I think that's it for this section. Yeah. Is there anything
Oof.
else you want to talk about with? Oh, and I do want to say thank you to Polygon and Game Rant for helping me with my research on finding the leaks and all. They didn't help, but I am using their site. So there's my works cited, and also the timeline. That was very helpful. Yeah, I think that's it for this section. As if I'm signing. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about with context?
I mean, time will tell how The Last of Us is sort of contextualized, because it's such a particular moment in history. But when you look back at controversial games of the past, Resident Evil 5, Far
Mm.
Cry 5, um, Metal Gear Solid 5, all the fives, no good fives. Sometimes they're remembered for their controversy, sometimes they're not. Sometimes these things fall by the waysides. I think for this one, which was so driven by toxic gaming culture, I
Yeah.
honestly, I don't know that it will be remembered for this part of it. So it's good for future archaeologists to remember that it was rough for the people making the game.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe that they fully deserve your sympathy, it's it's unquestionable that the hatred that was leveled against these people was just absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And yes, I share in your apology on behalf of
I
BTO and
know.
with Eyes East and Q&A.
And
Donovan,
yeah,
he says so too.
yeah, what's funny is I now am getting stories that Assassin's Creed Valhalla there's some certain sections that have leaked. And so I kind of laugh at it now just because I haven't clicked on any of the articles. I mean, I'm not going to play the game. I'm not as interested in it, but it doesn't seem as if it's as visceral a reaction. And so I'm
Right.
just like, da da da, I've been through the worst. That can't hurt me. Have you seen anything with this? Are people upset that there are leaks or anything?
I actually didn't know. I thought you were going to talk about just the guy stepping down, but I
Oh
had
no.
Valhalla has not been on my radar. As soon as I heard that
Okay.
Cassandra wouldn't be in it, my
Oh,
interest kind of
yeah,
evaporated.
I know. No, yeah, apparently that has been leaked a bit, and I don't know.
Sucks.
But I mean, Assassin's Creed, you expect lots of people to die, so I don't know if it's got
Right.
as rabid a following compared to this. And then there was something else I was going to say. Oh, I've seen a lot of stuff on social media also that they tell Druckmann, like, if you know, why'd you force this story? You didn't have a
Oh,
story, you made something up. And I have to say that I feel like if he didn't have a story, he would not have created this. Because
right.
his big thing, and he even says that about part three now, you know, if there's a story, they'll do it. If there's not, then no. And I think it took him years to come with like, what would that idea be like? So I don't think, while there's probably pressure to continually create award winning and well received games at Naughty Dog, I don't think that he does it for the bucks. I don't
Right.
think he was forced to do a sequel in order to get money. He did it because he felt that there was a story to tell. So I just want to say that for him. Okay, well,
Yes.
we're going to take a break, our first break here. When we come back, we're going to be looking at the gameplay and overall story beats. But first, we have Zaius's Radio Hour featuring Future Days. I won't cry this time or get sick by Pearl Jam.